Welcome to Managing Post-Exercise Inflammation, from Ibuprofen to Cherries. My name is Roberta Anding, and I'm a practicing sports dietitian for Baylor College of Medicine and the Rice University Owls. As a disclosure, the presentation and accommodations were provided by Gatorade, the sports fuel company, and the statements and opinions contained in this program are solely mine. We have learning objectives, and after this presentation, participants will be able to summarize the physiological difference between chronic and acute inflammation as it relates to exercise, and how anti-inflammatory compounds can combat inflammation. Be able to translate data and evidence-based research into informed recommendations on how to incorporate anti-inflammatory nutrients into athletes' diets, and list at least 5 dietary sources of anti-inflammatory foods and their bioactive compounds. Starting out with inflammation, we have to have a working definition of acute versus chronic. Acute inflammation can be caused by hard training or injury, and the mode of inflammation is a little bit different. The inflammatory response is characterized by redness, swelling, heat, pain, and loss of function. And in most people, this response is generally well regulated. The 4 main components of inflammation include, first of all, increased blood flow to the site, therefore the redness, increased permeability of the vascular wall, allowing plasma and large molecules to translocate, an increase in leukocytes, white blood cells, such as neutrophils and macrophages, and these leukocytes release chemical mediators such as prostaglandins, reactive oxygen species, and histamines, and more about that later. And this acute inflammation will generally resolve in a few hours to days. Muscular damage is the hallmark of the inflammatory response. Now keep in mind, when it's an injury-mediated inflammation, is a little bit different. Contusions and sprains are responsible for about 90% of sports injuries that are managed by athletic trainers and the sports medicine staff. In addition to the redness, swelling, heat, pain, and loss of function, this mechanical damage will also cause capillary rupture with bleeding and edema, and oftentimes the formation of a hematoma. So what is this inflammatory response? The acute phase is the aggregation of leukocytes, growth factors, and cytokines. This immediate response includes the phagocytosis and leukocyte release of reactive oxygen species and proteolytic molecules. The third phase is regeneration, and this means that the damaged tissue is removed and the regeneration of tissue begins. Growth factors and anti-inflammatory cytokines aid in the repair. So this cleanup is oftentimes taken care of by macrophages. And these macrophages initially will come in and do the debris cleanup, and then they also switch, and another subtype will start to release inflammatory cytokines to aid in the repair. So macrophages are really pretty critical in this process. So blunting the inflammatory response. And the debate in the literature is whether or not to blunt this process, and it's oftentimes suggested that this initial inflammatory response, particularly when it's due to exercise versus injury, is a normal and adaptive response. Now, if the phagocytosis is allowed to continue, it may cause more damage. The secondary damage caused by phagocytosis may prevent the restoration of normal function. So the interventions can include medications and nutrition. So I think the key point here is that if it's allowed to continue, if there's no turn-off switch to phagocytosis, then you end up having a poor return of muscular function. NSAIDs that are commonly used by athletes reduce the activation of COX enzymes, and these are the enzymes that are responsible for pain, inflammation, and edema. So oftentimes athletes, after a hard workout, will go into the training room, they'll grab a handful of an NSAID and then believe that this is part of the recovery. But if inflammation acute inflammation caused by exercise is part of the normal and adaptive response, this may not be a great strategy for that athlete to impose. So the COX pathway may be necessary to maximize muscular hypertrophy. So the whole idea is you go in and injure the tissue. Let's say, for example, by eccentric exercise, you go in and injure the tissue, and part of the restoration process or regeneration process is actually going in and repairing that muscle, and that may be impeded by the chronic use of NSAIDs. So in general, NSAIDs oftentimes can be used for an injury response from early in the injury process, but shouldn't be used chronically, as again, it may impede the process of muscular hypertrophy and regeneration. So based on this data, athletic trainers should educate athletes and to avoid the overuse of these medications. Clearly, the overuse of NSAIDs can contribute to GI bleeds and other issues as well, so these are medications that should not be considered benign. So what are our nutrition interventions? And certainly as a sports dietitians believe in a food-first philosophy, and the synergy of food, I think, is going to become apparent as we go through this presentation. So the nutrition interventions can be put into different categories. The polyphenolic or plant-based compounds are bioactive compounds. And by definition, a bioactive compound is a compound that doesn't have a requirement. So it's not essential for life in the way that protein would be considered essential for life. So these bioactive compounds are generally plant-based compounds and can be considered nutritional heroes on the plate. Omega-3 fatty acids are essential fatty acids, and so they're not considered bioactive compounds, but certainly have profound physiological effects on the inflammatory process. Whey protein, which is a milk-based protein, about 20% of the protein in milk is whey protein, contains and is a rich source of branched-chain amino acids that become important in the regeneration of muscular tissue. And then vitamin D is essential. It is an essential nutrient. However, because the primary source of vitamin D is exposure to the sun, it could be considered an essential nutrient, but one that you can make in your body with proper sun exposure. So looking at this picture, the polyphenolic compounds, you can see that when we talk about polyphenols in the diet, we're looking at a wide variety of compounds. Certainly, we know a little bit about red wine and the fact that it contains resveratrol, which is a polyphenolic compound found in grapes. Lignans are found in foods like flaxseed and are considered a fibrous compound as well. Allagitannins are found in berries and in fruits such as pomegranates. And then we see phenolic acids as well, found in beans and whole grains. And then that whole subset of flavonoids, anthocyanidins, again in berries, flavonols found in products like quercetin, apples, and some of the cruciferous vegetables. And then we have cachectins that are found in green tea and apples, and proanthocyanidins found in chocolate and other compounds, isoflavones found in soy, flavones found in green leafy vegetables. And you can see the wide variety, and each one of these, through unique mechanisms, has the ability to impact inflammation. So consider this as we go through the specific polyphenolic compounds, that what we're really advocating here is the need to have a plant-enhanced diet. In working with athletes at a variety of levels, they oftentimes will focus in on proteins, and the fact that you need protein for muscular hypertrophy, muscular regeneration, and repair. However, really the heroes on the plate in terms of inflammation is a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. So if you're taking a history from an athlete and every morning, 365 days of the year, they're having blueberries, it's a great food. But if they're having blueberries and not having a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, then they're only going to be getting one type of polyphenolic compound, and what we are really advocating here is a variety. So encourage your athletes as we go through this presentation and in the real world, encourage your athletes to try new foods, foods that they haven't had in recent years or maybe never tried, and find ways of enjoying them, maybe in the form of a smoothie. So let's take a look at some of the specific polyphenolic compounds and their mode of action in terms of reducing the inflammatory process. Tart cherries contain an anthocyanin found specifically in this species. The dose in most of the studies is about 30 milliliters, or about an ounce, of tart cherry concentrate that can be mixed with other juice. And remember, this is a concentrate, so this is something that's going to be a little bit too tart to drink straight. And so oftentimes you can mix it with something that might be a little bit sweeter, like apple juice or orange juice. And this dose is oftentimes recommended before bedtime. Tart cherries can reduce high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation. And research also suggests that these tart cherries may reduce uric acid, which is elevated in gout. This may be of particular value for over-fat athletes, and that is really kind of the correct term, is individuals who are over-fat by body composition who might be at increased risk for metabolic syndrome and gout. There also is some data suggesting that it can reduce blood pressure, and it contains a small amount of natural melatonin to promote sleep. So this is a product that, beyond its anti-inflammatory compounds, can also promote sleep, and a dose before bedtime of a concentrate may help to promote sleep via melatonin. Berries contain, again, another wide variety of polyphenolic compounds that in the literature have been shown to reduce muscle soreness. Dark blue, purple, and red fruits contain a wide variety of polyphenolic compounds, including but not limited to resveratrol, quercetin, proanthocyanidins, and gallic acid. The varied antioxidant compounds in berries really illustrates the need to consider whole foods as a primary source of these nutrients. And being a sports dietitian for a few years, it is oftentimes my experience that as professionals, and particularly our athletes, are looking for the magic bullet, and they want to know what is the best food source, or what one food should I include in my diet. And we really need to promote, again, that variety, because look at the brilliance in colors, the red in the raspberries, the dark blue, purple pigments in blackberries. And we really want to focus in on a combination of nutrients, mostly because a lot of the synergies between these polyphenolic compounds are really not well understood. So years ago, I remember someone saying, well, you didn't really need to eat blueberries because they weren't a good source of vitamins and minerals. But it is the blue pigment in blueberries that makes that food a nutritional hero. Beetroot juice is a very interesting compound, and I'm going to say it has a variety of different physiological effects beyond antioxidants. So in beet juice, you can see that really dark red pigment called betalain. And betalain is very unique in the fact that it is an antioxidant. But a concern for your athletes, and probably part of their education, is beet juice will turn your urine red. And so if you're not anticipating that, it can be quite a frightening experience to go to the restroom and all of a sudden have this red pigmented urine that you're believing to be now blood in your urine, where it is not. So when we look at beyond its antioxidants, it's important to realize that beet juice is a really good source of dietary nitrate. And dietary nitrate in the mouth, based on the bacteria that live in your mouth, can convert to nitric oxide. Nitric oxide can increase blood flow. It is important to understand here, though, because the conversion from dietary nitrate to nitrite and then nitric oxide is oftentimes bacterial dependent. If you use an antibacterial mouthwash and you kill the bacteria within the mouth, you can actually limit the conversion of dietary nitrate to nitrite and ultimately reduce the conversion to nitric oxide. So beet juice is one example of where you can get dietary nitrates, but it's also found in spinach and other green leafy vegetables that are part of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. So this is a very earthy tasting product, and in my experience, I will oftentimes take a beet juice from the grocery store and mix it with another juice like pomegranate juice or other juices that have a rich polyphenolic content, cranberry juice, for example, because the synergy of nitrate is oftentimes enhanced when you have other polyphenolic compounds. So what better way to deliver dietary nitrate by mixing this earthy juice in something that's sweet or tart to cover that up? There's also data to suggest that because nitric oxide may function as a vasodilator, increasing blood flow, that it may also be helpful in controlling blood pressure. So working with professional athletes that oftentimes refuse to take antihypertensive medications because they're leery of the side effects, I've been pretty successful clinically in reducing blood pressure by having athletes drink 2 glasses of beetroot juice, about 8 ounces apiece, daily to help to lower their blood pressure, and found that to be pretty effective. Another, I'm going to say, clinical pearl for you is that the role of nitric oxide in preventing chronic disease is now being evidenced in individuals who are overweight and that might be at high risk of prediabetes or diabetes, that if they use mouthwash, that they actually increase the conversion of just an overweight status to prediabetes or diabetes, really indicating a clinical role for dietary nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide in the prevention of chronic diseases such as diabetes. So this is one of these foods that has a benefit not only physiologically in improving exercise performance by decreasing the oxygen demand of the tissue, but also may be really important in the management and prevention of chronic diseases. If you look at data of retired football players, for example, oftentimes they are at increased risk because of osteoarthritis or inability to continue with their exercise program for diabetes, and this may be a valuable modality, is to increase the nitrate-rich vegetables. Other nitrate-rich vegetables, in addition to beetroot juice, would include spinach, green leafy vegetables such as arugula, and remember, we want a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, so if you have athletes who struggle with beetroot juice, you may want to recommend that. Another dietary strategy to make beets a little bit less earthy is to oven roast them. They get a little bit sweeter when they're oven roasted, and again, that earthy taste is oftentimes a limiting factor for compliance. Pomegranates contain a polyphenolic compound called elagitannins, and in one study, supplementation reduced loss of strength associated with inflammation. And remember that oftentimes that inflammatory process is redness, swelling, heat, pain, and loss of function. So pomegranates may be able to reduce the loss of strength associated with inflammation, although the mode of action is unclear. So oftentimes with these polyphenolic compounds, we may not know the exact mode of action, but they may reduce eccentric muscle soreness, and in the world of strength conditioning, the focus on eccentric exercise or the lowering of the weights has now become, I'm going to say, vogue again, and pomegranates may be a good opportunity or a delicious opportunity for people to reduce that eccentrically induced muscle soreness. Turmeric, oftentimes referred to as curry spice, has a component in it called curcumin, and you can see many curcumin supplements on the market. And a word of caution with supplements, although we believe curcumin is the only active ingredient in curry spice, history is going to tell us that that's probably not true, and we want to consider this as a whole food. And a study by Davis indicated that curcumin is effective in reducing delayed onset muscle soreness via multiple mechanisms. This includes altering transcription factors and other signaling molecules, including the modulation of these COX-2 enzymes. And curcumin can also increase nitric oxide production, increasing vasodilation. Interestingly, there's a demonstrated effectiveness in protecting the chondrocytes and the prevention of cartilage destruction, indicating effectiveness in bone and joint health. Now, this is a spice that, if you're not really fond of curry, may be difficult to consume. So another thing that you can do with this is make something called golden milk, where you take curry spice, and I use an actual hand mixer and blend it in with milk. And again, you get kind of the sweetness of curry spice without the overpowering effects that are oftentimes found in curries for your athletes who don't like those. Ginger is a unique plant compound because it has both anti-inflammatory as well as analgesic properties. So there's some pain management with ginger as well. In a study by Black, 2 grams of ginger taking 45 minutes and through the next 24 hours, so this is not a singular dose, experienced a 13% reduction in pain after eccentric exercise. The concern is the delivery of a 2-gram dose. And 2 grams is actually a lot of ginger. And if you've had it in stir fries and juices and smoothies, it has a sweet flavor. But it actually is pretty spicy if you're just having ginger root juice. And so it may be better to grate it into sauteed vegetables or stir fries. And because the flavor is intense, it blends well in juices and homemade smoothies. I actually have a recipe that I've used with some professional teams that will take beet juice, some pomegranate juice, and ginger juice and mix it together. So you get, again, I'm hoping the synergistic effects of these compounds, but it's a way of the ginger masking some of the earthiness of the beetroot juice. In some of the teams, I actually will do what I call ginger shooters, which will just take ginger juice and line it up in shot glasses, and athletes are oftentimes willing to take something that's a little bit more intense in flavor if they can just take it in a shot glass. Saffron is the yellow spice that is oftentimes used to flavor rice. It's found in Indian dishes, oftentimes for my athletes that are from Central and South America. They like yellow rice that's oftentimes seasoned with saffron. This is an example of the role of spices and seasoning agents as part of a plant-based diet. And I'm going to mention it here that you can imagine for many athletes that have grown up in a household where mom or dad or another adult has done the cooking, that they've not ever really learned how to cook, and they're certainly not well versed with spices. So cooking demonstrations are really important in terms of helping athletes to realize that the use of spices, even if they can just cook plain food, may have some benefit to their overall health and possibly sports performance. In a study comparing saffron to indomethacin, 39 non-active college students participated in an eccentric training protocol, which of course emphasizes the lowering phase of a lift. And students taking the saffron reported less pain and reduced inflammatory markers and a lower concentration of lactate dehydrogenase during this eccentric training. So can you imagine making a dish with saffron, a little bit of curry spice, and some ginger, and some of these can just be grated into a familiar food such as rice to increase compliance with consumption. Omega-3 fatty acids fall into the category of an essential compound, and the most common biologically active agents are EPA and DHA. EPA stands for, and you'll see why the abbreviation is common, stands for eicosapentaenoic acid, abbreviated EPA, and DHA stands for docosahexaenoic acid, and these are the most biologically active omega-3s. These are found in cold water fish like salmon, cod, and albacore tuna. And in the next slide, we'll go through some of the physiology of these essential fatty acids. And flaxseed contains omega-3 fatty acids, but does not contain EPA and DHA in measurable amounts. So flaxseed contains a compound called linolenic acid, which is the parent compound to EPA and DHA. But in your body, the conversion from linolenic, found in flax, to EPA and DHA is only 8 to 15%. So this is going to become significant for your vegetarian athletes, or particularly your vegan athletes, because they'll essentially eliminate cold water fish from their diet. So an alternative for someone who is vegetarian may be the consumption of algae oil, and algae oil will contain some EPA and DHA, which I'm going to demonstrate to you are the heavy hitters in the inflammatory process. So the type of dietary fat can influence inflammation. So linoleic acid, and these words are a little tricky because oftentimes there's just one letter difference. Linoleic acid is found in corn oil and safflower oil, and this is the predominant fat in the American diet. It is found oftentimes in red meat because in this country we finish red meat, beef, lamb, and pork, oftentimes on corn. And the fat that is in their feed will ultimately end up in their tissues and cell membranes. And arachidonic acid is a powerful eicosanoid that is associated with a pro-inflammatory cytokine. So NSAIDs, the mode of action of many NSAIDs is to limit the production of or conversion of arachidonic to its pro-inflammatory cytokines, aspirin probably being the most common of those. So this is the type of fat that most people consume. It's oftentimes in salad dressings and margarines and in lots of different foods, potato chips, all different kinds of chips that athletes may eat. It can be found in commercially or restaurant-based foods. So it is the predominant fat in the American diet. So in the American diet, we consume about 10 times more omega-6 than omega-3, which is going to be really pretty important because in the conversion, in the metabolism of these fats, there is something called competitive inhibition, meaning that the greater amount of omega-6 in the American diet limits the conversion of linolenic acid, that omega-3, to the big dogs of EPA and DHA. So the more omega-6, the less omega-3 is converted to EPA and DHA. And the reason is, in practical terms, the same pathway that metabolizes omega-6 also metabolizes omega-3. And this is a difference in, I'm going to say, the American diet over the last 100 years. 100 years ago, most of our animals were grass-fed, and grass feed is going to contain more omega-6 because more omega-3 because that animal is not being finished on corn. So the more an animal is grass-fed, the more omega-3 is going to be incorporated into their cell membranes and their flesh. So you now see in the grocery stores the emergence of grass-fed beef, and although the difference may be subtle to the consumer, the reason that is becoming popular is grass-fed beef is going to contain more omega-3. The challenge for many of our athletes as well as consumers is the price of grass-fed beef, and so without knowing the differences, most consumers are going to go with conventionally harvested beef. So here is this slide on competitive inhibition. So the enzymes to add carbons to make that chain longer and add double bonds is shared between these fatty acid families. So it's the same pathway indicated by that yellow arrow. So keep that in mind as we go through this. Omega-6, linoleic acid, is converted to gamma-linolenic acid, which is found naturally in borage oil and black currant seed oil, and converted to arachidonic acid, again, which is oftentimes found in its preformed version in meat, and produces leukotrienes and prostaglandins that are inflammatory. These are pro-inflammatory cytokines. Omega-3 fatty acids, linolenic, found in flaxseed, for example, is converted to EPA, which is found in its preformed version of fish oil, and is responsible for the production of anti-inflammatory prostaglandins and leukotrienes. DHA is the fatty acid found specifically in high concentrations in the retina of your eye as well as in your brain. So there is data suggesting that with traumatic brain injury or concussion, that the consumption of EPA in fish oil and its conversion to DHA may promote, and that's an underscore, may promote the recovery from concussion. However, the data is also pretty clear that these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids need to be in the brain at the time of concussion, which really suggests an ongoing dietary intervention here, not just the consumption of a short-term fish oil supplement. So in this conversion, or in this pathway, the more omega-6 that's in the diet, the competitive inhibition does not allow omega-3 fatty acids in the form of flaxseed oil to be converted. And remember, that conversion is only about 8 to 15%. So although flax is a great source of lignans and should be consumed, let's say, for example, sprinkled on oatmeal or salad, you cannot rely on it as the best source of omega-3 in the diet. Vitamin D. This is a deficiency that is common among athletes. And when I worked for the Houston Texans, we actually did a research study. And knowing where Houston is in terms of latitude, we do not have what is called a vitamin D winter. We get enough sun, natural sun exposure, all year round in Houston. And despite that, when we actually assayed athletes for vitamin D deficiency, 41% of the team was deficient. And this is with athletes practicing outside. The athletes actually at that time, would rather play on real grass than other forms of turf. And so this deficiency is more common than oftentimes is given credence to. And think about the athletes who are indoors. And that could be gymnasts, it could be basketball players, lots of different indoor sports, or athletes who train or practice in predominantly a domed ballpark due to the heat and humidity. And that's pretty common in Texas to have domed ballparks. And this is vitamin D receptors are found on cells that have a nucleus. And the role of vitamin D in human nutrition is way beyond bone. So we oftentimes think of vitamin D deficiency and increased risk of fractures, which is true. But don't underestimate the power of this hormone-like vitamin in the transcription of greater than 1,000 genes. It also, in its gene expression, upregulates anti-inflammatory cytokines and downregulates the pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is really pretty critical when we're trying to understand, particularly for our individuals who have that chronic inflammatory response or a chronic disease, why we oftentimes don't see the effects of one compound in the literature. Could it be that the individual has a vitamin D deficiency, underlying vitamin D deficiency, that has not been controlled for? So this is a really pretty important regulator. So beyond taking a look just at vitamin D in bone, there's a new compound that's been recently discovered called hepcidin, and it is a marker of inflammation. And this molecule, increased levels of this marker can actually sequester iron. So it means it binds iron. So as part of its inflammatory process, it actually binds iron. And in a study of basketball players, elevated levels. There were elevated levels of hepcidin in response to rigorous training. Vitamin D may downregulate the production of hepcidin. So oftentimes in the literature, this type of anemia is considered to be the anemia of inflammation. So if hepcidin sequesters iron, iron is not available to improve oxygen delivery to the tissues, and this is, again, really pretty important. I will issue a word of caution here with vitamin D, is you can't tell vitamin D deficiency via diet, because the sun is going to be the most important controller of vitamin D production. So keep that in mind, that if athletes start taking large amounts of vitamin D on their own, that there could be an increased role for toxicity. And I will say back in 2008, when I did the study with the Texans and we actually looked at blood levels, no one had a toxic level. And you're now seeing athletes understand the role of vitamin D. And so you know what that means. More is better. And clearly, we're really not looking at more is better here. We're really looking at the need for blood tests, and if the athlete is deficient, appropriate supplementation, and then a retest. Too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing, and I think we've seen that over and over again with different forms of supplementation. Well, what about whey protein and branched-chain amino acids? There's a lot of controversy in the literature now over the effectiveness of branched-chain amino acids, and branched-chain amino acids include isoleucine, leucine, and valine. And leucine is considered an anti-catabolic amino acid, and leucine may prevent some of the catabolic damage associated with chronic inflammation. So in some of the studies, particularly by Ra, a study using an eccentric protocol demonstrated the suppression of muscle proteolysis and reduced biochemical markers of inflammation with supplemental branch chain, and I'll say the hero in the branch chain amino acid world is leucine, and the addition of another amino acid, taurine. So this is one that I think we have to stay tuned for. But consider this, that whey protein being milk protein, you can get whey protein and a decent source of leucine by drinking somewhere in the range of 16 ounces to a quart or 32 ounces of milk per day, which for an athlete who requires 5,000 calories is a nice way of doing it. In addition, milk protein can be found in a variety of whole foods. You can add dry milk powder, for example, to oatmeal. There are certainly products that contain whey protein as a way of increasing lean body mass, but don't underestimate the power of milk-based products as well. So this is, again, one of these things that I think we have to stay tuned to the literature on the role of branched-chain amino acids and consider your real food sources as well. So we have to have some practical application. Athletes don't deal very well with biochemistry, and how many times have you heard, just tell me what to eat? So we need to encourage athletes to eat half of their first plate of food, fruits and vegetables. And you've heard this said before, but I think it goes and needs to be repeated. It needs to be a wide variety. Simple statements like eat from the colors of the rainbow can oftentimes take the science of polyphenolic compounds and make it practical for athletes. And polyphenolic compounds are found in fruits and vegetables. So if you have an athlete, for example, who doesn't love vegetables, you might be able to get some benefits from blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, pomegranate, cranberries, and get a wide variety. Remember, let's not forget simple things like apples contain a nice antioxidant called quercetin. So even apples and foods that are common to athletes or more common to athletes can be good sources of antioxidants. But variety is clearly pretty key here. Smoothies can become a great vehicle to customize and increase anti-inflammatory compounds by just mixing. So consider this. You could make a smoothie with milk or a whey-based product. You could add spinach, which is going to be a source of dietary nitrate. You could mix it with a wide variety of berries, and now you've got something that your athlete might really enjoy and is something that they would try, versus if I put it on their plate, maybe a little bit more reluctant. Supplements of vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids should be considered, since these nutrients are often lacking. So when you think about omega-3 fatty acids in cold water fish, if we're really looking at doses of omega-3 fatty acids, oftentimes when an athlete takes a supplement, they'll come in and say, well, I took fish oil, but it didn't work. And when you look at it, they're taking 500 milligrams. An effective dose is about 2,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA. So 500 milligrams, or a half a gram, isn't going to be clearly enough. And so oftentimes these are under-supplemented compounds. Omega-3 fatty acids are under-supplemented, and athletic trainers and sports dietitians should give advice to the athlete based on dietary history. If someone takes in 2 cold water fish meals per week, they're going to be getting a really reasonable dose of omega-3 fatty acids. Whey protein and branched-chain amino acids also have a role in preventing muscle protein breakdown, which is a consequence of chronic inflammation. Some of the newer research by Stu Phillips and others will suggest that protein, in order to prevent muscle protein breakdown, needs to be consumed at each meal, and not just a large dose or backloading that protein at the end of the day. So athletes should be encouraged to have protein at breakfast. They could have some Greek yogurt, milk and cereal, and maybe even a couple scrambled eggs and a big bowl of berries at breakfast, and need to have a source of protein at lunch and dinner, and possibly a source of protein before they go to bed at night. So consider making a tart cherry juice smoothie with some Greek yogurt, maybe some additional whey protein mixed with tart cherry juice and other polyphenolic juices as well, to reduce that inflammation that all athletes are going to experience at some point in their training. Athletic trainers should monitor and educate athletes on NSAID use, and I think this is going to be a work in progress for years. Certainly ATCs and sports dietitians really understand the consequence of any chronic medication use, and really should be educated on NSAID use. And dietary strategies should be promoted. The whole dietary approach should be promoted. One other thing with the fruits and vegetables that I think is key, that oftentimes we believe that if it's not fresh or if it's not organic, it's not worthy of consumption. And a lot of our athletes, particularly athletes that are high school or athletes that are below the federal poverty line, may rely on canned and frozen. And remember, the reason why fruits and vegetables are heroes on the plate is because of the polyphenolic compounds. So, for example, if you have frozen broccoli or frozen carrots, the colors are preserved, and we really need to promote the availability of increasing vegetables and fruit, and not just focusing on fresh for our athletes who are unable to get those due to financial concerns. So what does this anti-inflammatory diet actually look like? Fruits and vegetables should be at least half of that first plate, ideally a third to a half of each plate. Cold water fish should be consumed in at least 2 meals per week, unless the athlete doesn't like fish, and then consider a supplement. And we really need to control that competitive inhibition by reducing the amount of omega-6 rich fats, such as corn oil. So a nice substitution is olive oil. Olive oil, because it's plant-based, is going to have some polyphenolic compounds. And so you could consider using olive oil as your primary ingredient for salad dressings. There are now salad dressings and mayonnaise on the market that are olive oil based, and reducing the omega-6 rich fats such as corn oil. So again, as you're doing that cooking demonstration for your athletes, consider promoting olive oil. I control a couple training tables in my professional life, and a very easy way was for me to educate my chefs that I only want olive oil to be used and to avoid omega-6 rich fats such as corn oil. Simple sugars such as sweets and desserts should be limited because sugar can have an inflammatory component to it as well. Fried foods, particularly fried foods out at restaurants, really need to be limited because as that oil is used over and over and over again, all oils, omega-6 and omega-3, that heat and chronic use can convert those to trans fats, which we know our trans fats can contribute to an increased risk of coronary disease. And don't ever forget that spices add additional flavoring, and all spices, not just the ones that we highlighted, but all spices can be a rich source of antioxidants. So again, as a sports dietitian, the practical application on how to follow an anti-inflammatory diet takes all of the science that we've reviewed, and now you can do some plate coaching, helping your athletes make better choices every time they go through the line, or every time that you see them, you can review, are you eating your fruits and vegetables? Are you eating from the colors of the rainbow? And so for more information, you can go to the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, gssiweb.org, and thank you very much for your attention.